It's time to examine in a bit of detail this feature that Rome Total War had, and that Medieval 2 had, in order to make the most of the transition to 3D with the Total War 2 engine, and that is training. I've made a short about this to show how the positioning of the men is affected, but let's go into this in a bit more detail and examine some of the implications of it. We'll start with the positioning and the movement and how it affects just the movement aspects. We won't go into combat yet, that'll come, because that's a lot to get into. It's quite difficult to analyse that. It requires thought, which I've done most of, but also the presentation can be complex. So first of all, we will handle the movement and the relative positioning and how it affects other units. So we're going to do a grassy flatland. That's the standard control test map. And I've actually prepared the game to showcase this in a bit of detail. I have made units. So we've got the standard chosen swordsmen who have no training. They are barbarians that have the stereotypical disordered formations. Leaving aside the historical accuracy aspect, which I don't give a shit about and which is irrelevant. So we've got untrained, somewhat trained, and then highly trained, the most well trained. And I've differentiated them visibly with cost. So normal ones, then edited ones with training, and then edited ones with the best training, because there's 3 different levels of training in this game. And it's important to remember that units are not actually entities that exist independently. They are constructed by the game's mechanics. So let's take a look at this. Here is the export description unit. So we've got the standard default chosen swordsman, untouched. Then we've got the upgraded ones that I created by duplicating over and changing some of the definers and then giving them trained and then changing the cost to visibly distinguish them. So this is the only things that I've really changed that affects how they are in game. This stuff here is just the descriptors. What do you even call it? What do you call it? This is how you instantiate the unit pretty much. And then here we go again with the most upgraded ones. So 690, 685, 680, and that's how I remember them. So just keep that in mind so you don't get confused. And of course, highly trained, trained, untrained. So we've just got 3 different versions of the same unit, basically identical for demonstration purposes to show how this works. So we're going to just be looking at them. I invited people to speculate on the differences, and people are talking about how fast they respond to commands, which is something that gets speculated about quite often, because people also used to think that the command stars affected the reaction time, the response time of units, and also how quickly they get back into formation. So we can check that. You should be able to see quite clearly that there's a difference here. This is one of those things that are just in the background of the game. One of the things that you can just never notice even though you've been playing the game for years. So I'm just putting it right in front of you, making it obvious, super obvious. So here are the highly trained version. Here is the basic trained version. And here is the untrained version. So this is like elite Roman infantry or hoplites, phalanxes, pikes. They have to have the best training because maintaining an organised phalanx is difficult to do. It requires training, so they just have that by default. And then you have the basic training level, where you see that they've adopted lines, but they're not very straight. It's as if they understand the basics of how to stand in lines, but they don't adhere to it very rigorously. And then over here you see the lines are just completely fragmented. Sometimes you can see something resembling lines. They do seem to resemble lines. You could pick them out if you had to, but they wobble quite a lot. So it would be understandable if you just said that they're not standing in line whatsoever. But as you can see here, they clearly are supposed to be standing in lines. So it's as if they have a radius that they are just placed inside randomly. And then when they get basic training, it seems to tighten. So the spread on their placement is reduced. So they have a small area within which they can be randomly placed. And then over here, it gets really tight. You see some outliers like this guy here, but mostly they are a really straight line, and sometimes it's impressively straight like this one. This one's quite straight. And of course they could just stand in perfectly straight lines, but there's a human element to this. It's believable, it's human. It seems real. Just like this. That's an important aspect. It's always really believable and immersive. Alright, let's take a look at how they move around. Are they moving? Oh no, they are. Alright, well, we're gonna just turn around and see what happens when I tell them to run over here. So the reaction is identical. Takes the same amount of time for them to react, and then when I toggle sprint, unsprint, they responded first. Seems to just be random how quickly they react to being told to run. Let's try this again. Alright, so they're in position, and then hang on, I'm waiting for them to get in position. So this is the untrained one, this is the trained one, this is the highest training one, I think. Let's see how long it takes this time. And then when I tell them to run, it seems quite even. It's even. And then unsprint. This one has a slight lead, but let's see if it amplifies. I'm pressured a bit by the peasants there. They're distracting me a bit. Doesn't seem like there's much of a difference there. So they don't seem to respond to orders inconsistently. It's not like the ones that have training react quicker. Let's test this again. I'm gonna mark them as the defenders this time so they don't attack us. And then same again. And then peasants again. So far you've seen how it affects the relative positioning of the men in the units, which is the most important thing. And of course in a melee it means that they're always going to have differences. So this unit is going to fight differently to this one, and that one's going to fight differently to this one. Because this one is the most uniform, whereas this one is disordered and chaotic. So this one is going to have a consistency that this one can never hope to approach. We'll get into that. But I'm going to just look at this a bit more. So I'm going to tell them to go right up to the edge of the map, and then I'm going to just periodically sprint and unsprint. So once I see them running, I'll tell them to stop. Once I see them decelerate, I'll tell them to sprint. Yeah, I don't see any differences here. And then loose formation. Let's take a look at this. Let's see how loose looks. So I'm going to put them in identical formations, and then we can compare it. So I'm just examining how they stand in formation, so just in loose this time. So this one resembles archers or peltasts. Disorganised. This one is more organised, but you can see the deviation from the perfect pattern becomes more apparent. And then over here, it still just looks really orderly. Really orderly, yeah, big spaces between all the men. Over here, you have men that are sometimes quite close together. Like, see these here? The HUD interface thing is actually overlapping. The chevron, the arrow, it overlaps, and you see that here again. So sometimes the zone of the soldier overlaps. Over here, you never see that. Sometimes it almost happens, like here. Like, see that there? Barely touches. And then over here, it's like it's just precluded. It cannot happen. They cannot overlap. And then we'll look at it from the side here, and you can see all the way down. It's only once you get to this unit that you start to have occlusion occur. And I could stretch this all the way out into... Oh man, I'm going to do that. I'm going to stretch these all the way out into 2 lines. Can I do that? Yep. So let's take a look at this. Let's see how this looks. See that? You can see all the way down the line. And it'll be even better here. Especially once they tidy this up. Yep, they tidied it up. You can see all the way down. And then with this one, it's not the same. It's messy again. Very messy. Look, it's 1 man thick there. Alright, now they've tidied it up. But yeah, you can see the messiness of it. Especially over here, look at that. A big space. Some big differences. Now let's see if we can do this. It's interesting to look at how this works. Four files. Big differences. Yeah, you can see the messiness here. See how they seem to step into each other's lanes. And then over here, it's just perfect. Such a fascinating system. And this is a way that units are differentiated that is completely separate from stats. This is not a vertical change. This is a change that's systemic. So this is a way that the very space, the way that the men in the units use and occupy space differs. It's a change in behaviour, a change in the physical disposition of the unit. It's drastic as well. So this is the direction Total War should have went in. It really is. Can you imagine the kind of effects that this could have on combat in a game that simulates combat well? Can you imagine? I've played a lot of simulation-driven RTT games and had a lot of really immersive experiences in RTT games over the past year or two. And the possibilities with something like this are endless. The things that you could do. And I'm going to be showing some of that when we get into combat. First of all though, there's something we have to do. So I'm going to show one of the ways that this affects the game and what the player does. An emergent effect that follows from this. If you can't think of one by now, especially with all the clues that I've given you over the past week or so, then goddamn. Alright. Let's do this. We're gonna go with... We're gonna duplicate, so we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we're gonna do this. 1, 2. Oh wait. And I'm gonna show you something that follows from these changes, these alterations, that are completely separate from the stats of the unit. This is not a statistical thing that affects how the unit fights. This is not like that at all. This is something else altogether. Surely you can see where this is going. And then this one. And I'm not making a column, I'm making a row. Oh, I should have brought a third unit of Velites. Should have brought a third. In fact, I'm going to do this again and bring a third. I want to do this right. So this shouldn't take long. I know exactly what I'm doing now. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3. Need more money. Here we go. So let's see if this system and the way that the game utilises it has implications. Let's see if it does. Let's make this deep. Let's make deep formations. There we go. That's what I want. And then again, here. Looking really fucking good. And then 1, 2, 3. What do you think will happen? What is gonna happen here? How's this gonna work? What's the outcome gonna be? Type your comment and tell me how this is gonna go. Look at this, tell me what's gonna happen. Tell me what will happen when I run these skirmishers all the way through these formations. Tell me what's gonna happen. Type it right now and say what the difference is gonna be between each of these 3 tests with this one variable. Nothing to run through, organised lines to run through, chaos to run through. How is this game gonna deal with this? How is this simulation gonna handle these circumstances? Aren't you fascinated to know how this is gonna go? Because of course, remember, they don't have the forward-backwards behaviour. They're just standing there, they're not going to move, they're not going to do anything. They're going to hold their position and they're going to let our men run through them from the side. So what's going to happen? I'll show you. Let's see. Shit, I haven't started yet. Whoops. Alright, let's see. Here we go. Isn't that fucking magical? Isn't that fascinating? Isn't this sensible? Doesn't this seem like a robust outcome? Isn't this exactly what you should be expecting? Aren't you relieved that this is happening? Hasn't your confidence in Rome Total War just been boosted by this? Alright, they made it to the finish line first, and then the skirmishers make it later. all at the same time pretty much. They arrive cohesively, and then these ones arrive later still, and they are more fragmented, and it takes a while for the back to catch up to the front. Isn't this an amazing experiment? This is why Time Commanders was used by the BBC, because this game has spacing, mass, physics, the just time itself, it all is simulated properly, it all works well and sensibly. And of course I've done the test on Rome 2, a test almost identical to this, where you can see how these ones would be the most slowed down, and then these ones and these ones arrive at the same time. It's just a fucking mess, that game. It's an absolute disaster. An absolute train wreck of a game. Nothing works right. It's a fucking absolute mess. An embarrassing fucking mess. Let's do this again. Let's do this again just because of how satisfying it is. Let's do it. Need to get this right. Alright, here we go. Let's watch it again. Here we go. Look at them finding their way through the men. They're not bouncing off of them and glitching around with fucked up spastic physics. They are actually just finding their way through. And look at it, they all do it at around the same time. It takes them all about the same amount of time to do it as well. See how the men are not, they're not getting shot around, they're not getting pinballed around like bumper cars, as someone said. I think it was Dolphy that commented that. That's not happening. They are standing on the spot and these guys are finding their way around them, trying to get through. It's just like in Medieval 1. And once again the results are consistent. It works again. What more can you want? Why the fuck don't tests like these dictate the direction Total War has taken? Obviously they do tests like this at Creative Assembly, they do test this shit when they're building the game and upgrading the engine and developing the engine. Why are they not disgusted when Rome 2 malfunctions entirely? Why are they not embarrassed that Rome Total War can so often do way better? And the reasons for it are obvious. It's not like we even have to be confused and think, why is this happening? I don't understand. We know why this is happening. You can even see them passing between the men sometimes, finding the spaces between them to get through. How can this have just been such a more robust and healthier simulation than what we've had since? And then over here, even this just looks good. Yeah. So this is one way that Rome Total War and Medieval 2 differentiated units that was completely separate from stat modifiers like the spreadsheeting of the 10 or 12 stats, whatever it is, like armor pierce attack, melee defense, evasion, all this garbage. This is how you actually differentiate units in terms of the systems and mechanics that build the game that the player uses, that draws the world that the player navigates. That's how you do it. You do it meaningfully, so that it has sandbox-like meaningful consequences that the player can explore with intent and have agency. Like, goddamn, you could notice this and be aware of it and utilise it and be more effective when you're using skirmishers. This can offer skirmishers an earned marginal increase in efficiency if you're running them through organised lines on purpose. So this is just one of the ways that this kind of thing, these little details, make a massive difference to how the game works and plays, and how it can be appreciated, or just even noticed and explored for the first time properly, nearly 2 decades after the game is launched. And you could sit and do this all day with Rome Total War, and I'm going to keep doing it with this, because we haven't even started looking at how this affects combat. I've done a video on how the heat stat affects fights, like when you're fighting in the desert and you get tired quicker, and that affects combat. This is another one of those videos, and it's the same kind of thing. It's one of these things that build the game, these mechanics that were implemented in an attempt to make the game more complex and a more robust simulation that's more engaging. Look at this, we've got stat ground, which affects how the units perform in different terrain types. So this is acknowledged by the game. Stat heat here, there's the modifier for how quickly they get tired, and I think that's correlated to the armor value. And then you've got a type of weapon, you've got the spacing of the men in the units, which no one's really talked about ever. The formation type that they have, this is the formation that gives you the ability to open file. I think this is it here, because even untrained infantry can do this to allow skirmishers to move through them forward, backwards. And then of course what we just looked at, trained versus untrained. And it's already fascinating to see how this relatively simple system of how men are positioned with respect to one another in units can have all this possibility unfold from it. So stay tuned for the next video where we look at how it affects combat. Or does it? Do you think this affects combat? I would be absolutely fascinated if I didn't know. So, are you?